eye out for any questions as we go. Today being our first webinar is a fairly high level affair. I wanted to touch a little bit on all the things that have been happening in the smart water space, in Taggle's, and give you a little bit about Taggle's view about where we see the industry going, what's been changing over the past few years. Give you an update about what's happening on the technology side, both on the smart metering side, but also on the sewers side. Talk a little bit about software, and then open the floor up for questions and answers. And then we'll, just to give you, to wrap up, we'll give you an insight into what webinars we're planning over the coming weeks. So I thought I'd start at a high level and just give everybody a bit of an overview about what we think is happening in the industry. I think at this point it's fairly clear that smart metering is inevitable. It's certainly taking off in the electricity sector. It's far more advanced in the US than it is here in Australia. There are regulatory changes happening in the UK and Europe that are making smart metering really take off. And it's reasonably clear that the drivers behind all of this are to do with population growth, water scarcity, aging infrastructure, particularly the factors of looking at leak detection, regulatory compliance on the from the perspective of reduced water demand, but also, particularly in Europe, carbon footprint would have been quite a big contributor to energy consumption, but also customer expectations. Customers can get real-time access to data from all sorts of other parts of their life. Not being able to get it on their utilities is an outlier and something that the customers will increasingly demand. The other thing that we've noticed over the past few years in the smart metering side, particularly in the water side, is that we've moved out of the trials, moved out of the idea of doing trials and into full rollouts. I think because smart metering has been around in the world for an extended period of time and in Australia for at least 10 years, it's reasonably well understood that the technology is mature. There are plenty of case studies around Australia of water utilities who have rolled out complete fleets of smart meters and have demonstrated results, positive results as a result of doing that work. So just over the last few years, we've had customers go straight into full rollouts. I mean, you can see the list there: GWM Water, Narrabri, Midwestern, etc. Rather than go through an extended and expensive trial process, it's often quite simpler just to have a look at what other people are doing and see on the ground what the results were of installing smart meters. The other factor that I think is quite interesting that's happened over the past few years is that the expectations about how long these devices should last is extending. 15-year device life is becoming the new norm. Not only pushed by vendors, Honeywell's extended the life of their smart meters now up to 15 years, but also from customer demand. We're seeing internationally tenders coming out that require that the smart meters last for 15 years. And if you think about the impact of a device that lasts 50% longer, it reduces the cost of installation of that over the extended period of time. If you think about the 30-year life of a fleet of smart meters, having to replace them only or install them and replace them only once during that period of time, as compared to a 10-year device, it's a 33% cheaper to install a device that lasts longer. But it also extends the time over which you can amortize the cost of the meter. So labour and capital costs are two of the major elements that factor into a business case for smart metering. So the longer these devices last, the better the overall business case. The other thing that we're seeing that's emerged recently is that software is almost essential, is absolutely essential in every smart meter rollout. In the early days, there were utilities that experimented with rolling the technology out and using spreadsheets and their existing billing systems, etc., to be able to manage the billing data. But the sheer volume of data that comes from smart meters quickly overwhelms a spreadsheet. Even a small town can generate 500 million rows of data every year. And you can't process that sort of information by looking at a spreadsheet. And things like billing systems, ERP systems, even lots of analytic systems are not really designed to handle that volume of data. And one of the things that's really important in understanding smart metering data is that the system doing the analytics on that needs to understand what it is that it's looking for. So we're finding that over the last few years, every single project we've done has come with metadata management system as part of the requirements. And these specialized pieces of software provide the utility the ability to do leak detection and to provide the customer engagement platform and to impact the demand of water and provide the interfacing through to the billing system without overloading the billing system with unreasonable amounts of data. These systems have the algorithms built into them to be able to make use of the data and actually deliver the business outcomes that is ultimately what the water utility is looking for. And I think it's that completion of the solution stack, everything from the device through the wireless communications to the data and data processing, that makes the smart metering a now a mature solution for utilities. We're also seeing that the customer engagement side of smart metering is increasingly important. While it's not essential that you share smart metering data with the end customer, it's certainly the most powerful way of impacting their behaviour. Most of our water utility customers are now deploying a customer portal as part of their smart meter rollout. And this provides that closed loop feedback where when a consumer or a resident or even a business can see what their water consumption is in a very short period of time, they can understand what behaviours it is that is driving that water consumption. It's very easy to, under the current situations where billing might only occur every 3 to 6 months, to receive an unexpectedly high water bill, but have no understanding as to what it was that drove that consumption. By providing near real-time data through the customers using a customer portal, they can see what their water consumption is. They can get notifications of high water consumption, and they can think about what behaviours they've been doing over the last day or so that's influenced that water consumption. Further, the customer portal is the way that water utilities have the ability to communicate with customers about potential leaks on the customer premises. And wherever we go, we find that 10 to 15% of properties have a leak, and many of those leaks are really significant. Lots of those leaks are concealed leaks, and the customer isn't aware that there is a problem unless data is provided to them in a way that they can understand that. So a customer portal is a way that a end consumer can register and supply their email address and mobile phone number and request to be notified whenever they have unusually high water consumption, or to be notified very quickly if there is a potential leak on their property. So that's a little bit on the just very high level trends. I wanted to touch a little bit also on what's happening in the smart metering technology side. And some of you may be aware that Honeywell released this integrated smart meter, the V200HT, only really at the beginning of last year did it become available for utilities to roll out in a large scale. And very quickly that meter has become the most popular smart meter in Australia. There's about 70,000 of those installed, and those meters come with the integrated, the Taggle radio integrated into the meter itself. So it's a one-piece solution. It's a 15-year life. The life of the battery is actually embossed on the shroud of the meter there. It includes standards-based best practice security, and it's a zero configuration installation. So these meters work once they're out of the factory. You don't need to do anything to the meter to make it a smart meter. You could potentially install these things without installing the appropriate network and continue to run them just as a regular meter and install the wireless network later. But there's no work required at the meter to be able to make this the smart meter enabled. The objective of all of that is actually to make the cost of installing these things as simple as possible. We're also just about to release, in conjunction with a meter company called Akiba, a static, no moving parts smart water meter that includes the radio embedded in it as well. Similar to the V200 HT, this device is a zero configuration. It works out of the box, includes the radio as part of the device. But in this case, the Akiba meter is a remnant magnetic field technology, which means it has no moving parts, it can't be blocked, it doesn't wear out. There isn't anything that can jam the mechanisms of this. And so that makes it particularly valuable in situations of raw water or untreated water and other similar sorts of situations. We're also seeing a very substantial uptick in the adoption of advanced network meters. So those meters that are either bulk water meters or more commonly the network meter on the district metered area. And these more advanced meters not only capture and report volumetric data, they provide additional parameters about the water. So, for example, these four provide volume of water, totalized volume forward and reverse. They often provide, well, actually all four of these provide flow rate, so instantaneous flow in either direction. They'll often measure pressure of the water as part of the same instrument. And because each of these are battery-powered meters, they'll actually provide the battery state reports of how the meter itself is reporting. I just saw a question come through from Ryan Sellings about the Akiba and the Honeywell meters. So if I just go back one slide. They are substantially different technologies, the Honeywell and the Akiba meter. The Honeywell meter is a traditional volumetric style meter. Anybody who's familiar with V100 or the V200 mechanical, this is the same approach to measuring water consumption, but it has a digital and integrated radio register on the top. The Akiba is a completely different types of measuring technology. It uses an effect of magnetic fields impacted by the flow of water to integrate and determine the amount of volume that's flowed through that. So it's a very different style measurement technology, but very similar on the electronics with a digital register and integrated radio. So we're finding that as the sophistication of the meters are increasing, that provides additional information through to the water utility about what's happening on the network. Real-time feedback from the network meters correlated with information about consumption meters is particularly powerful from identifying potential leaks in the network, looking at mass balance. And I'll actually come to that a little bit later when I talk about the software used to analyze mass balance in the district metered area. Something that's occurred fairly, or something we've been working on for an extended period of time, but we think is maturing just over the last year or so, is the extension of this same sort of smart water technology, but into the wastewater network. It was very surprising to me when I first started looking at this, that the only notification that a water utility has that there is a sewer blockage causing an overflow is when a customer rings the utility and says, I can see sewage in the street. sewers are effectively dark assets. There's no instrumentation in most cities' sewer networks. And I don't think it's likely that we're going to be in a situation where we're relying on the public to alert that there's a sewer issue is going to be acceptable for very much longer. We're having significant success with a number of our water utilities with a couple of very low-cost fixed sewer network monitoring technology. On the left-hand side, probably the simplest sewer monitoring that you can install, simple float switches that switch on when the sewer level comes up. In that left-hand photo, there's two float switches. There's one at the pipe level, that when the pipe is full and this sewer manhole well starts to fill up, the bottom switch will switch on and we'll get an alarm that the pipe is now at capacity. The second switch, the one on the left-hand side, when it triggers, we've actually got an overflow status. So that hole, you can see the white plastic tube, that's the overflow from the manhole. And that means that sewage is going out probably into a nearby creek or waterway, ideally away from the public, but still no longer contained in the sewer network. And that's an alarm state that a utility really wants to know about. Our strategy with these sort of low-cost sensors has been, if we can keep the costs for the sensors as low as possible, then you can afford to install fixed monitoring like this right across the network. And it's that fixed monitoring that hasn't existed previously. On the right-hand side, there's a slightly different technology. At the bottom of the screen, what we can see there is an ultrasonic level sensor. So what that does is send out a bit of a sound. It sounds a little bit like a click, and it works a little bit like echolocation in a bat or something like that. The time it takes for that click to be returned from the surface of the water tells you how much water is in that well. It's a very, very accurate technology down to the millimeter accuracy. And it's got some sophisticated digital signal processing in the sensor head that can detect the difference between the sewer level, the water running at the bottom, and the concrete apron that forms the bottom of the well. So it can ignore the concrete and focus just on the sewer level. Those two sensors provide different granularity of data and can be used for slightly different purposes. But what we're seeing is that these sensors can be installed and be expected to operate in the sewer for as long as 5 or potentially 10 years. And the data that provides can substantially reduce the occurrences of sewer overflows. Probably the most interesting part of this sewer monitoring, certainly the most interesting projects recently have actually been conducted by SA Water, where in addition to the smart network monitoring that they've been doing in the Adelaide CBD, on Kangaroo Island and in Port Lincoln, is that they put a whole lot of different types of sensors into the wastewater network. So SA Water are not only looking at the level of the sewage in the network, they're also looking at the speed of the flow of the material. They're looking at gas concentrations in the pipe that leads to corrosion and damage to the pipes, as well as any metal infrastructure. They're looking at the concentration of odor-causing gases in the air, which is the major cause of customer complaints about sewage, and looking at air quality and weather behaviours and correlating all of that data together. The outcomes of the smart sewer network in South Australia has been that probably the most significant one, at least in my view, has been that sewer overflows that would previously reach the surface and impact the public can now be predicted with 2 to 3 days worth of notice. It appears that the most common causes of blockages in the network tend to be tree roots. Tree roots tend to block the network over days, not instantaneously. And we can see from the data that the sewage in those sewer wells, it rises over time but with enough notice that the cleaning crew could get out there and put the cleaner down through the pipe, get rid of the tree roots and restore the flow to normal before the sewage hits the surface. The benchmark numbers vary a little bit, but only a little bit between utilities. The benchmark cost for a sewage overflow event is about $25,000. So it doesn't take very many overflows to be prevented in order to justify the installation of this sort of technology. I might just check on the questions. We've got a couple of questions here. We've got one from Chris Manning talking about inflow versus infiltration, which is great because that's my next slide. And a question about the flow of data. I might just try and touch on that flow of data. I wasn't going to get into the IT integration sides of things at the moment, but at a high level, particularly sewer network sensors, they send their alarms in real time over the low power network. That's picked up by the AWS platform that processes that data again in real time and delivers alarms to the target systems within a few seconds of those alarms being generated in the field. Now, the target systems can vary. You can deliver those alarms to a SCADA system. You can deliver those alarms to some other analytics system. But I will in a moment show you a product we've just recently released more broadly called MySewer that is designed specifically for handling these sorts of alarms. Quick question from Michael Thomas. I'm not recording this this webinar, but I will share the slides afterwards to anybody who wants. So if you send an email to myself or Siobhan, or even to the inquiries email address at Taggle, let us know that you want the slides. We'll make sure that we get those through to you. For the SA Water network, the diagram here, Taggle integrates and provides the data for all of these sensors. In some cases, SA Water procured the sensors directly themselves and then supplied them to Taggle and said, can we integrate these with the network? And in each case, that's been successful. In some places, however, Taggle will actually provide the sensors directly in a pre-integrated solution. And what I think we are seeing more of a trend for is where the utility buys a working solution from Taggle rather than buying pieces and putting it together themselves. We're very flexible about how we work with that, and if you've got particular sensors that you'd really like to use or already own, we can work with you on how to integrate that with its low power telemetry. But additionally, we can also supply turnkey solutions out of the box. Let's see, what are we up to? So just handling the inquiry from Chris Manning. Thanks very much for the clue in here. One of the things that is, I think, unique about this new style of sensing, as opposed to the traditional SCADA world, is that in the SCADA world, sensors are generally put on critical control points in processes. So an individual sensor will tell you whether there's a problem that you need to address, whether a tank is empty or is too full, or whether a pump isn't running or something like that. One of the things that we're seeing more now in these low-cost sensors is that it's not the individual sensor that can tell you the whole story by itself, but the correlation of sensors and groupings of sensors that when you combine that data, you get new insight. So one of the things that we see in the sewer monitoring world is that particularly in the tropical north, it's rainwater that is the greatest cause of overflow events. There's just so much rain, particularly in tropical North Queensland, that the water is getting into the sewer network, overwhelming the capacity of the pipes and forcing overflows, often in very unfortunate places where where even though the overflow fluid is quite dilute, it can still be in contact with members of the public. You might be aware that the most common causes of wet weather overflows are described as I&I, or inflow and infiltration. An inflow is when rainwater goes into the sewer through either illegal plumbing or leaky manholes, but basically enters the sewer from the top. Infiltration is a little bit more insidious. That's when rising groundwater seeps into the sewer through broken or cracked pipes. And that has an equally difficult problem, because you can get quite a substantial amount of water flowing into the sewer network, causing overflows further downstream in the network. Utilities can spend a lot of money detecting, preventing, identifying the causes of those overflows. If you're looking for inflow, the usual test for that is to smoke test the network. So you drop a smoke bomb into the sewer and you see where the pink smoke comes out, because the smoke shouldn't be able to get out of the network, and where the smoke gets out is an indication of where water might be going in. Whereas if it's an infiltration problem, typically a utility will realign the pipe to block the cracks and prevent water from getting in. But at least one of our utilities has spent a lot of money doing both of those activities and not necessarily seeing the results that they were hoping for. By using a combination of rainwater data and sewer level data and correlating those in time, you can get a much clearer view as to what's causing the overflow events. And so what we're looking at here on the top right-hand corner is a low-cost rain gauge. In fact, it's a very high-quality rain gauge. That's the one used by the Bureau of Meteorology. With, on the left-hand side, that little stick pointing up is the telemetry built into it. That system stands alone, no battery power, doesn't require any communications cabinet or expensive installations, and it will provide very, very high resolution data about rainfall. When we plot that data in in blue, I should say, on this chart down here, we can see that rainfall events in blue can lead to sewer overflows, indicated in black. There are two levels to the sewer on this, using those that two-stage blue ball solution I showed earlier. The first one is the pipe is full and we're now at capacity. And the second black line up here at the top is we're actually in an overflow state, and there is untreated sewage water now out in contact with the public. And you can see in this situation, there was from left to right, there was a small rain event and there was no problem with the sewer. And then there was a much higher, very peak rain event, and that led the pipe to be full, but then it returned to normal state. And then there was an extended rain event. So even though it was a lower concentration of rain, the volume of water that came in that downpour was going straight into the sewer and creating overflow straight away. This chart clearly shows that it's an inflow problem. There's a second event that happens, I think, the following day, where a rainfall event leads to an immediate sewer overflow. And that correlation in time indicates that that's an inflow problem. Infiltration problems occur where it rains for several days or even a couple of weeks, and the groundwater rises very slowly. Then you get an extended sewer overflow event, and then only over time does that return to normal. So infiltration takes a lot longer to commence and a lot longer to go away compared to inflow. So looking at that data and that correlation of data gives a utility some indication about what maintenance activities they should be doing and which one they're wasting their time and money on. I have a quick question here from Jared Johnson asking if the sensor data can be pulled out to do their own analytics. Absolutely. All of this data is always open. It belongs to the water utility. There are many ways of getting the data out. And I can talk to you more afterwards about the mechanisms of that, but in the simplest form, you can get giant spreadsheets, CSV file formats of all of the data. There are also other more advanced ways of getting the data out. I like this story quite a lot. This is 3 ultrasonic level sensors that are monitoring the sewer level in Townsville on the day of the State of Origin football match at I think it might have been the end of last year. It's a very interesting pattern. So all 3 sewer levels were down, just running a trickle, and then they all 3 start to show a rapid increase over an hour or so, a peak about 7:30, and then a tail off for about 10 o'clock at night. Now, I can't tell you whether this is true, but there's a bit of an apocryphal story that Queenslanders start drinking about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. They start flushing the toilet shortly thereafter, and they're drinking solidly through to about 10 o'clock at night, at which point they've gone to bed and the sewer returns to normal. More analysis is required to understand that in any more detail, but it's an interesting, you can see the resolution of data that you can get from the ultrasonic level sensors. We've got a question about the data analytics tool that we use, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. We're suggesting that the utilities look very closely at a tool that we have called MySewer. MySewer has been used for sewer analytics in Mackay for coming up on 6 years now, and it's just been trialled pretty substantially by Townsville and to a degree Narrabri. We're at a point now that we're now releasing that product for general availability, and it has this analytics built into it. This chart here that we were looking at, that is the MySewer application. Chris Manning's made a point that the ultrasonic level sensor allows you to see rate of rise, so you can diagnose infiltration problems without relying on an overflow event, which is an interesting point. That's absolutely true. And I wanted to touch just briefly on other things that we're seeing water utilities beginning to do. This is one of my favorite ones more recently. This is a application for using the same sort of sensor technology, but for pressure monitoring, low-cost pressure monitoring. A bit like the sewer monitoring, you don't know what's going on unless you've got fixed pressure sensors in place, monitoring behaviours over time. Just using some almost semi-temporary installations, you can see there's a pressure sensor installed here on a non-return valve, and another one installed here in line with a water meter. That the pressure in this network was suffering significant drops in pressure. This one here, where it drops to almost 2.5 bar, is below the service level committed to their customers by this particular utility. Customers were actually complaining about low pressure, and it wasn't until the sensors were installed in the network that you could see that the low pressure was actually an intermittent event, and surprisingly quite a periodic event. There's one there, there's one there, there's one there, where the pressure in the CBD, and this is actually Townsville, the CBD of Townsville pressures dropped substantially, but only for maybe half an hour, even less in this period of time here. It was enough for customers to notice and to complain about, but the root cause of that wasn't immediately obvious. It wasn't until somebody noticed that the supply to Magnetic Island, which is off the coast of Townsville, actually comes from a pipeline, I think it's just north of Townsville. And that periodic drop in pressure was the result of the reservoir on Magnetic Island, the float valve opening to fill the reservoir. And it was dragging so much water out of the CBD of Townsville that it was causing the pressure drop. So rather than having to go to expensive pumping stations or pipeline duplication, this problem was actually resolved very quickly by just reducing the capacity of that pipe, putting a flow restrictor at the end of the pipe, and that would resolve that pressure problem that people were complaining about. Very, very low cost sensors in place for an extended period of time can provide insights into the network that people just absolutely didn't expect. When Townsville first did this analysis, they spoke to the water engineers and said, well, what pressure should we see in our network? And they said, oh, you'll never see anything more than 10 bar. And so what we supplied for the pressure for the pilot project were 10 bar sensors. What we quickly discovered, though, is that the pressure in the pipes in Townsville do fairly regularly exceed 10 bar. Those pressure sensors were maxing out at their maximum scale of 10 bar of pressure. And so the next tranche of pressure sensors installed are 16 bar sensors. And so there are overpressure events, very short transient events occurring in the Townsville Townsville reticulation network. And these overpressure events run the risk of damaging infrastructure. 10 bar is quite a high pressure for a reticulation network, but it can also not only increase the possibilities of leaks or bursts of pressure of supply lines, but also potentially damage to customer infrastructure. So again, low-cost sensors identifying problems that people hadn't previously anticipated. And then the third one, which might not apply to many utilities, but if you're in a regional council and the stormwater channels are part of your scope, then the same sort of technology can be used for river monitoring. So here's the two photos of the same installation on a river in Townsville, where they're using that same ultrasonic level sensor that we were using in the sewer and the same rain gauge we were using for sewer monitoring to actually look at rain and river levels and see whether or not this solution can actually add data to the flood modelling in the area. Similarly, there are other sorts of sensors. These ones get installed on the bottom of either a stormwater channel or some other sort of waterway, and uses ultrasonic level to detect the level of water that's above the sensor and the speed at which the water is travelling. So we've had a couple of quick questions about software. I did want to touch on that right now, just checking on time. We're almost there, and then we'll open up questions and answers. I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, but that software is an essential part of smart metering. The volumes of data, the types of data from hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of sensors can quickly overpower and overcome the traditional analytics tools. So in the Taggle suite, we have a product specifically for metadata management. This is a product originally developed by Mackay Regional Council. Taggle took over the reins of this product at the beginning of last year and have been investing heavily in the development of this software. MyWater includes three major components: a metadata management system specifically designed for managing the relationships between smart meters and properties, the people who live in those properties, the installation and maintenance records, but also the algorithms associated with detecting leaks on the property itself, customer side leaks, as well as looking at mass balance on the district metered area to look at network side leaks. It includes a field tablet app that's used for efficient installation and maintenance of smart meters and other sensors, and a customer portal that allows a utility to share this data with their customers very, very quickly. And looking at this data and using computational methods to look across the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of properties, the software can very quickly identify leaks. And leaks, small leaks in customer properties can very quickly turn into very big leaks. So the software is designed from the ground up to understand all of this stuff and understand what a leak looks like, and to have algorithms to be able to detect those. Network side leaks can be analysed using mass balance, so the difference between the water that was supplied to a suburb versus the water that was consumed in that suburb. On this chart here, in light blue is the water that was consumed, and in dark blue was the water that was supplied. And you can see for most of the time that tracks pretty consistently. That's the sign of a fairly good looking network. There are little blips and a big blip over here where a substantial amount of water was supplied that wasn't picked up by any of the billing meters. And that lump there, the difference between those curves, that's non-revenue water. That's water that was produced but wasn't billed to anyone. And that could be unmetered consumption. It could be a standpipe. It could be a fire hose or a fire service being used. And the size of that can be quite significant in terms of dollars. That's just a zoom in on that function. When you look at mass balance and you look at it with high granularity data over time series, then the profile of what's going on in the network stands out very, very clearly. These are two mains breaks that occurred 2 days apart. And you can see how clearly the difference between the water supplied and the water billed stands out on that sort of chart. We'll take a breath for a moment. I'm just about to switch to the discussion about my sewer. That chart earlier I showed you with the inflow and infiltration and the correlation of rainfall and sewer levels is the My Sewer application. So I think I've already mentioned that this product's been in use at a utility for a number of years. We're now making that available to all utilities. So if anybody's interested in exploring a sewer-specific analytics product, please let me know. We will touch on this in more detail in webinars in the coming weeks. So I'll wrap up with just a bit of a sales pitch. Taggle's been progressing very, very well as a company. We're growing very, very quickly. These stats get out of date almost the moment I put them up on a slide. We now have more than 40 Australian water utilities using our technology and software. We've installed over 180,000 smart meters, which makes us more than 75% of the Australian installed market. So we're by far the market leader in smart meter technology. You can see all of the customers right around Australia that are using that technology. We decrypt, decode and deliver 1.8 billion meter readings every year. It's a substantial amount of data that goes through our network. And any new piece of data that arrives on the network is delivered through to customers inside of 5 seconds. So we've scaled our technology, our software technology in order to be able to process the sorts of data that water utilities generate. So that's me. I think I've spoken for 45 minutes without taking a breath. I'd like to open up to any questions and answers, any comments from the audience. If you can find the chat menu, that's probably the best place to put things right at the moment with 25 participants on the call. We have a question from Mario about the granularity of data that you can get out of the V200 HT and the A210. There's always a balance between how much data you get and battery life. The default configuration for both the V200 HT and the Akiba meter is to transmit data hourly, but both of those are configurable. If you transmit more frequently, obviously it reduces the battery life and effectively the life of the asset. But we find hourly data provides that perfect balance of very long battery life and high resolution data that allows you to detect leaks on a customer premises very confidently within about 2 days. 2 days worth of data will give you a very clear view as to what's going on in the network. There's a question from Jason about options for monitoring non-metered fire lines for non-revenue water. There are a few different approaches to this that we've been discussing with utilities. There's no single mature approach. Obviously, it's expensive to put a water meter on every fire service. It is fairly inexpensive, however, to install a pressure sensor on a fire service. So it's entirely possible that pressure monitoring will detect that when the fire service has been opened and there's a substantial flow of water. We've also explored using more sophisticated acoustic sensors that can detect the sound of flow, and that's a non-invasive mechanism. I am interested in exploring that if anybody's got a particular problems in that area. The trick is that there are lots of fire services and you need to do this cost effectively. And so we're very keen to find ways of doing that as inexpensively as possible. Chris Manning's asked about submetering for apartment blocks. I didn't have a slide in my deck today, but that is a subject that we get involved in. The regulations for that are different in every state, but there is, we have over the past few years done many high-rise apartment blocks, submetering not only their cold water service, but their hot water service, and particularly looking for water leaks, but also distribution of the water bill across the apartments. So if that's something that you're interested in, please let me know. If I've missed any previous questions, please repost them. Chris Manning has asked about heat and humidity sensors. That is something that we've just recently finalized a product for. There are many applications for understanding temperature and humidity, environmental science situations, machine rooms, smart cities, and we have some very low cost integrated temperature humidity probes that that can be very quickly, very easily installed at a very low cost and provide data over a very extended period of time. Again, that's in those other applications. I think we are probably out of time and I don't see any more questions. I want to thank you all very much for coming. I know that was a lot of material and a very long period of time. I thank you for your patience. I hope it was useful. If you have any more questions, I'm very happy to take questions afterwards. My email address is marc.englaro@taggle.com.au, or if you send it just to our inquiries email address, which is on the website, it'll get to me. And I'm happy to spend more time with any of you individually. We're making this webinar series an ongoing Wednesday afternoon series of events. The agenda for that is on the website, but it's also here. So next week we'll do a little bit more on sewer monitoring. The week after that, a little bit more on water analytics, and the week after that, the processes of installing smart water meters and the accessories that go along with that. Thanks everyone for coming. I think we might wrap it up there. Have a great day. Stay safe.